Okay, so where we left off, let's see. We
I
wrapped
think
up
I just went to Vero Beach.
Vero Beach.
I think so, from Melbourne,
Okay,
where I first saw the F-6. Got transferred, finished that program and transferred to Vero Beach for the night fighter program because I volunteered into the night fighter program,
okay,
which was very new then. It really wasn't fully organized, but it just started sometime earlier that year. And they had one guy, Danny somebody, that had gone to England, taken a night fighter training course with them, and he came back to the U.S. to set up a night fighter course for the Navy.
okay,
And he got it kind of set up and started at Vero Beach, and we had a schedule, a program there to go through. Got a lot of flying, and they had a way to fly instruments in the F-6. They had a plastic blue piece that fit inside the windshield, and it snaps in the corner, and you snap it in there, and you had to look through the blue to see out. Then they had orange goggles, or they had blue goggles and orange piece. Didn't make any difference, but the two together were opaque.
huh,
And so you'd get in the F-6 and take off and get up high enough to be safe, and always had two airplanes, one to look out for airplanes, and
oh,
you
okay.
put that piece in there and put those goggles on, then you could fly instruments in the F-6.
So if you got yourself in trouble on instruments, there was nobody to save you, was there? You had to know how to recover yourself.
Well, we didn't do that bad weather. I think it's good weather and everybody could see good, and they had a chase plane, you know, to talk to you all the time. Be sure you watch out for other airplanes. But it gave you plenty of practice, way to practice all you wanted to in the F-6, which is a good thing. That's the kind of thing the Japanese didn't have. We went a lot further in our training than they did.
I see.
And that was the beginning of the night fighter program. We stayed at Vero Beach for 3 months and got a lot of flying there, and that's where I and my friend had so much fun. I guess I'd say tail chasing. We would go and take off as a pair and fly little instruments, and then we'd take that shield out of the windshield and lay it down on the side and go have fun for an hour or two. And we'd go up and down the Florida coast and find the big Qs sticking up everywhere, and we'd separate, and both of us would go around the cloud somewhere in the general vicinity, and then we'd start hunting for each other. And how dangerous that was, I can't even express, because we didn't know where we were and which way we were coming around the corner, or if there's any other airplanes or anything around. We just didn't even think about all that. We just go around the corner of the cloud till we see the other guy somewhere around, and the one that found the other one won that round, and then we'd separate and do it again.
Now you were looking for each other on radar?
No.
Oh,
We didn't
it
have
was
any
by
radar.
visual.
We didn't have any radar in those airplanes.
Okay,
Just had the pod, but no radar.
okay.
In fact, all the airplanes there didn't have the pod on them even. They were F-6, F-5s, but not 5Ns.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just a game that us young, foolish people would endeavor to not kill ourselves and have fun, and take up that flying time. We got a lot of flying time there. Then we left graduating from that program just completing the hours, and I don't think of anything else that applied to us specifically down there except that just flying around, getting a lot of hours. And then we were sent to a squadron. That was just a group down there like they wanted in Melbourne, about six of us together. And there were other groups, and everybody flew. And then we were sent one group at a time to the squadron, the night fighter squadron, up in Westerly, Rhode Island. And they had a Navy base there at Westerly. Little bitty place. It was 2,500 foot long runways. And we didn't have any trouble with the F-6 doing that. And flew there for the winter. Melbourne was right after I graduated from Pensacola, 3 months, and then Vero Beach 3 months. That took half of 43. And then we went to Westerly, Rhode Island for the last, almost the whole last of 43. And trained another special schedule for training for night fighter. Did a lot of GCA and radar work. That we had radar in the airplanes, and we did a lot of mapping, navigation with mapping on radar, and GCI intercepts, where they'd send 3 F-6s up together and two of them would go one way and the third one would be vectored off by ground control somewhere else. And then they'd park and we'd get over here, and one of these would park there and just circle orbit for a while. And then they turn this one back toward this generally and turn this one that way. And then the GCA people on their radar would try to vector us to it, and it ended up not exactly head on, but always to the side and to a distance, the radius of turn to turn in. It'd vector you here and then tell you to turn into a heading, which they had tracked this one on, and try to turn you in right behind it. Usually a little bit extra. Sometimes we turn in half a mile behind, but they tried to get closer than that. And that's the method the British have been using all up to then, and that's what we did in the Pacific, just that sort of thing. So we did a lot of that at Westerly.
Can you show on that plane with this one? With that one doesn't have. That's not a 5N, but that other one is. What the difference is here?
Well, the F6F5N has this radar on it, which has got a radar unit inside, and it was actually built onto the wing, that dome was, but it could be removed very easily, and the radar just plugged into a receptacle, just like putting that device on the TV. You just plug it in, and then you had a small scope in the cockpit, and right on the instrument panel, and those two were the only real differences in the 5N and the 5. So it was just that was the only external difference out there on the wing.
Did it make the plane behave any different?
Couldn't tell it was there, no.
No.
You'd think you'd put it on there, but it didn't seem to make it. Maybe it would, I would say it did make a difference, but it was too small for you to notice. If any difference at all, it would have been to make the ball run over to the left side a little bit. If you were diving and picking up speed, it may have yawed a little bit that way. And if you're trying to shoot, of course, the shells would go a little bit to the left. But it'd be such a small difference that you couldn't see it.
When did you actually learn the carrier part?
There at Westerly, we started doing what's called FCLP, Field Carrier Landing Practice. We did that up at Charleston, Massachusetts, outside of Boston, Navy base up there. They had big field, big runways, and they had a carrier deck marked out on the runway, and they had sandbags with cables tying them together across the end.
Go ahead.
And we would go out there and take off and get trimmed up, everything, and then we'd come downwind, start getting down to 100 feet, and make our 100-foot downwind base, and start letting down to 50 feet for the approach to this simulated carrier deck down here. And then they had an LSO standing here on the corner of it, and he'd pick you up when you're on the base leg down here and start giving you the standard approach signals that the LSO used. And then we'd get in a good position. If we did good, he'd give us a cut, and we'd hit that runway and grab those sandbags. And it was pretty violent, a lot more violent than the ship, because the ship's moving, so you have a less differential speed. That thing's standing still. And so you hit that pretty hard, and that cable grabs. And I remember the first time I caught the cable, we were sitting on a parachute in a seat there with a bucket seat, and this parachute's in there, and you strapped into the parachute, but that parachute came out from under me and fell between my legs down here and hit the stick, pushed it forward. Because it jerked so bad back. So it was pretty violent, and it was a pretty violent touchdown too. You've seen that movies of the Navy airplanes hitting pretty hard, but they hit my hard right there. That's the hardest trial or effort you might ever see right there as our field carrier landing practice. As I say, the ship's not near so bad, unless you make a bad landing. Of course, you can always do that and make it pretty hard, but that is hard practice anyhow. We practice that and get what they decided was competent at doing that. And then that winter, early that winter, we got sent out, a group of us at a time, not everybody in that squadron, but a group at a time, was sent out on a CVE, a little carrier, into the North Atlantic. And we actually just got in airplanes and flew off the carrier and made the approach just like we did at the field and practice and landed on that carrier. And everybody got 12 landings, and that qualified you as a carrier pilot then. That was the end of this carrier training.
Did you do all 12 just bang, 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 or did you have go-arounds? Or
I don't remember ever having to go around, but I'm sure there were some, but I don't remember. I watched everybody else. Everybody watched everybody else, and then made their own. But it was pretty exciting because it was the North Atlantic that time of year was very rough and cold. We had to wear the heavy wetsuits. They said you wouldn't survive a minute without that in that water. But we didn't have anybody going to the water. Had I don't know how many people we had, 20 or 30 pilots that were getting carried qual the same trip. But I do remember that we nearly wrecked all the airplanes. Even so, when we went back to port, we went back on the carrier and got off, walked off, and I think they had a dozen airplanes when we went out, and it probably only had, I can't remember exactly, 2 or 3 that were flyable when we got back to port. So we were bad landings and bounces, one thing and another. Wore out most of them.
now that was there was no catapults on that, right?
Yeah, there'd be a catapult on there, but we didn't use it. We did what you call deck fly-offs. Just we didn't have very many airplanes, and they had to get backed up far enough to get deck. The F6 needed, I think, they gave it 600 feet, something like that. So when you do deck fly-offs, they got the deck marked and feet marks from the front, and even in combat, when you do deck fly-offs, the taxi controller, the officer of the deck, brings the crew brings the airplane forward or back from wherever it is, and he marks where that airplane has to be according to the load. He's got a sheet that says how much weight you're carrying that day, and he marks it back on the deck, and so that's where you park, right there. In other words, you always get exactly what you need. Never get any extra, never get too little, and never made a mistake. They didn't want the airplane to fly before it got to the front end of the ship, so they always calculate that.
What was the takeoff procedure? I mean, there was a certain checklist I'm sure you went through.
Just regular cockpit checkoff for normal in the ones in the cockpits.
You were on the engine up to full.
But the way once on the carrier like that, they're going to fly off, the landing signal, not landing signal, the deck officer would get you in position, lock brakes, and spin you up, and you'd get full power. And when you think it's got full power, he gets frantic and gets some more, and push on the throttle and do all he can. And then he sits there, sometimes 2 minutes with that thing running, all he can do, and he listens to it. Apparently it warms up a little and gets a little more, and he knows, and he hears it just right, and he'll drop his flag, and you release the brakes, and off you go. Prior to that, they made for normal takeoff, you use full flaps. Oh, that's all you could do on the F6 was full or part flaps. You go full flaps and full low pitch, full rich mixture, that lock in the canopy, and your head against the headrest. And then you get the stick back in this hand, to hold the throttle with this hand. You grab the throttle, which is up here, the mixture control up there, and the prop control is right here. Move down like this. It pivoted around the same center, but it moved down. So you hook your thumb around the prop control and these fingers around the mixture and the throttle, and locked all those onto that throttle card so it couldn't budge. Because when the catapult fires, if you haven't got your hand locked, your hand just fly off of it. Maybe the throttle pulls back, you don't know. So you always lock it on. Then you get this hand on the stick and brace it right in your stomach there and hold it just like that. So the stick doesn't fly back. You got to hold that position. And then when you got to do all that before that landing, the deck officer will let you go. He can see all that. He gets you wound up, ready position, and then he fires you. But on the catapult, it's more or less the same. But when the catapult fires, you're only 200 feet from the front end. That way, you got more airplanes behind there. They can stack up more airplanes. So once we got in combat, we almost never did the deck fly-off. Basically, I don't know, I'd say there were not 1% of deck fly-offs are all cat shots, because you could carry more weight and you get more airplanes on the carrier. So it's just a matter of making efficient operation of the whole thing.
More behind you getting ready to go.
Yeah, or just parked. But if there was 100 airplanes to go, going to be on that flight, then they all had to be there. Once you started launching, you couldn't. The carrier don't like to stay in the wind any 1 minute more than it has to, because submarines, they got to zigzag all the time. So when you get ready to launch, you can tell if you're sitting in the airplane and getting ready, everything red, getting cranked up and everything, but he's headed out of the wind. The wind's out of here, and he's headed out of the wind over here. And he starts turning back in. The ship leans over like a car without banking, around the turn without banking. It leans way over and comes around. And when he gets close to that heading, you better watch that deck off, so he's going to drop that flag when he gets just there. And when he drops the flag, that's for the first airplane. For the rest of the airplanes, the deck, that's where in the movies you see today when they talk about how everybody on the flight deck works together and everything. When that first airplane goes off, all the rest of the people working each airplane, there's a crew on each airplane to start moving those airplanes up all together and getting them in position, right on the mark, and guy winds you up, off you go. Takeoffs are usually something between 8 and 10 seconds apart.
Wow.
Landings are 15 seconds apart.
So if you were loaded with whatever you were carrying, rockets or ammunition or whatever, your max takeoff weight or whatever you can...
Well, there's not one there. It's whatever you got. And that depends on what you need. If they want you to fly, they have this much weight, boy, it's hanging on there.
So do you feel like you were, if you catapulted that 200 feet, that you were at flying speed when you left the deck?
Oh, yeah.
You never did sink down.
You're faster than flying speed. The catapult generally, for me, is a little different for each airplane and according to weight, but our weight normally, we were 150 going across the front bow of the ship. And it was flying. If the motor hadn't been running, it would make any difference. You're going to be 150 there, and you're going up 150, 200 feet. And if the motor's now running, you keep on flying, but it's going there regardless. That catapult puts you up there.
Wow. Where did the catapult hook on the gear? Or was
Depends on the airplane.
Okay.
On the F6.
Where's the big one? Here it is.
Right in front of the gear, right here.
Oh, up at the top.
It's just like on the car, under the bumper, the hook on the trailer. When they deliver cars, it's got a little loop thing. It's hooked right on. It's built into the airplane right there on the gear. Fasten the gear, one right there. And they got a bridle, a yoke like this that they hook onto that and that and that. And the catapult then is a little sled that's probably 6 or 8 inches high, sled flat in a slot on the deck. And they hook the front end on that, and the guy tightens the steam up and tightens it up, pull the airplane, and the airplane, you got the brakes all that time, and when it gets it tight, then he holds, and they start winding you up, and when you're wound up, the guy drops the flag, he fires that cat. And that's when you better be grabbed onto that throttle and the stick. But on the other hand, once he fires you, you're going to fly. There's no doubt about that. Every now and then through the NAVY-WWII, I never saw one, but I've seen movies of them. They had a cold catapult shot, they called it, when the charge of steam wasn't up or something. I don't know what went wrong with it or something. And the airplane would fly right off of that, but very shortly it wouldn't make it. Down it go.
So what was the stall speed on the Hellcat, do you remember?
I don't know exactly.
Must have been lower than 150.
Well, we made approaches that was I believe 72 knots.
Okay.
That should, I think the F6 flew at, I believe they said 6 knots above stall, so 72, it was 66 must have been stall speed without any load. That's after you fired dropped all the bombs, ammunition and everything, and burned up your fuel, so it's light by the time you make an approach.
So it had automatic flaps, but you could obviously manually lower those when you took off. And then you'd raise them after you launched?
Yes, you should, but if you didn't, they blow up if you go fast enough, but they slow down your acceleration, so you'd rather pull them up.
And then after that, they lowered at a certain speed or G level, huh?
100, 170, no, just speed,
blow
blow up. 170, they blow up.
And that was automatic?
Yeah.
So that you
so
could
you
maneuver
leave the handle down all the time if you wanted to, and then while you were flying high speed, they'd be up. And if you got in a fight and pulled G's or slowed down for going around a corner or whatever, you can slow down to 170, down they came, which is just what you want, give you a tighter turning radius.
Right. So when you landed, were they, was the flap stick down or notched up a little bit, like for 10 or 15 degrees or something?
No increment, just down or up, that's all you had.
Oh, okay. So you would land with the stick down, huh?
Yeah, flap control, flap handle, yes.
And would the flaps come down as you approach the carrier below while you were?
Well, if you're below 170, yes.
Okay.
And normally you would, you'd fly down. When you approach the carrier in a group, you'd fly upwind alongside on the right side by the island, and the first airplane would break off just ahead of the front, and then at a 15-second interval, the next airplane would start. And with practice you had by then, everybody made the same curve and the same time, so the time was the same. When you got around to this side, downwind, first airplane turned a little bit ahead of the LSO, like this is the end of the ship right here, ship going this way. When you got just ahead of this right here, starts to turn in, and by the time you get turned, he's moved out of the way, and you got a tiny bit of straightaway, maybe somewhere between 100 and 500 feet, depending on how good you made this turn.
Mm-hmm.
And the wind was variable sometimes, but you had to adjust a little bit.
That's what's always surprised me about carrier landings. I mean, even now when you see the jets and stuff, they don't come from a long approach. They come right out of a turn onto the deck. You got to be lined up perfect when you come out of that turn.
No use putting it off, getting way back, take that long to get there. And then after this, when this airplane cuts here and lands here, then the crew runs out and unhooks the tail hook from the cable, from the landing cable, and the pilot adds full power momentarily and starts the airplane rolling and pulls back and gets ahead and they put the barriers down while you're unhooking. And then the pilot rolls forward, the barriers go past the barriers pop up, and the next plane hits the deck. 15 seconds. If you're more than 18, I believe is what the criteria they used when I was doing it most of the time. You got to go to see the captain of the ship right after you landed, because they didn't like that. They tell you right now, you're wasting our time. We're going into the wind. That submarine's waiting for you out there. You get on the deck, we're going to turn. If you don't get on the deck, we'll leave you. So it was a pretty tight procedure all the time. Everybody did their best, you know, but I'm sure it slipped a little sometimes. But every time when we watched other people land, you'd watch your second hand, and the good guys, you could all tell every time, 15 seconds on the nose. And every now and then somebody would be 16 or 17, and he'd get his squadron commander, but to get his attention actually got down too.
Did you have any hairy landings that you can?
I never did have what I'd call a bad landing at all. I sure saw a lot of them.
Yeah.
But the ones you saw mostly sometimes were people that had trouble with the airplanes and didn't have full control. You couldn't blame them. They were doing the best they could. But
Well, you were telling me one time how robust, tough the F6 was. He's come back with pistons or cylinder heads missing and shot off and stuff like that. That's the R2800 was a pretty tough engine, but
yeah, of course, the only thing that was exposed was that front gear. It was the gearbox for the propeller, geared the prop down from the motors right in that box there, and the two mags were sitting right on the outside of that. So